We should be starting shortly. Thank you again, everyone. Okay, well, we'll get started here. Thank you again to everyone for joining us, Ricky, Sonia, Dennis, and I just wanted to introduce everyone to Michael Matthew, CPA, CA. He has been a professional accountant for more than 30 years, and his international practice is increasingly focused on real estate and real estate investors. He's also the CFO and the CTO for a home builder. Services he provides include entity structuring, setting things up both in Canada and the US, operational and tax consulting, tax return preparation for both Canada and the US. He's also invested in real estate in Canada and the US. Please help me welcome Michael Matthew.
Thanks, George.
And Michael, thank you. We have Sonia, Ricky, and Dennis here, pardon me. And I believe everyone is a real estate investor. And I think Sonia had some questions as well, too. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, George, for that introduction, and hello to all our guests tonight, Dennis, Ricky, and Sonia. As George said, my name is Michael Matthew, and welcome to our Real Estate Investor Workshop, whether this is your first time joining us or you've been here before. It's a pretty small group, so I'd like to make this more interactive, to make this more meaningful to you, rather than me just start with the general presentation. If you have any questions, whether they're burning or not, I'd like to start with that. It doesn't have to be just confined to tonight's topic of landlord and tenant issues, but if you have any questions generally related to real estate, I'll do my best to answer them as well. So just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask, please. Sonia, go ahead.
Thank you, Michael, for taking my questions. My question is, I'm actually thinking about investing in the States because I do have family in the States, predominantly in Texas. And what I wanted to know was, I know for Canada, they went ahead and incorporated this international foreign buyer tax. Is there some sort of thing like that when you're investing in property in the States, or is it governed by state to state basis? Each state has a different rule. So I'm wondering if you can shed some light on that for me, please. Thank you.
Sure. I work with a number of investors who invest in the states, various states. Texas happens to be an investor-friendly state, and that, I would say, is the number one issue for you to consider investing in the U.S. is it investor-friendly, or any jurisdiction for that matter. As you sort of alluded to, the rules differ state to state, and what can work well in one state won't work at all in another. If you're doing anything other than wholesaling, where you're getting properties under contract and then selling that contract to someone else, I would avoid states like California, New York, New Jersey, because if you get a bad tenant, you can go a year without any rent trying to get them out. Whereas a place like Texas, they've got about 3 weeks to get out if they're not paying you. So it's much different. Now, on your specific question about whether there's any foreign buyers tax or anything, I've never heard of anything like that in any state. They tend to be more investor friendly, at least the states that people tend to invest in, places like Florida, Texas, Arizona. So there's nothing like that to worry about as far as I know. You have the basic concerns, right, of investor friendly, which we've talked about. Is there a growing population? Is the population growing because of them wanting to get employment? Because if all those factors are yes, yes, and yes, there's going to be a high demand for housing from people who can pay. So that's the starting point. And then you go on from there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else have a question to start? You can just put it in your chat, in the chat, if your microphone isn't working. Okay. Well, as questions occur to you as we're going through, please just stop me and let me know. Just to give you an idea of the plans for the group, generally we meet on the last Thursday of the month, subject to some change around the holidays, and I typically deliver the content with the occasional guest speaker. We address many issues related to real estate, including additional considerations for those investing in the U.S., taxes, how to work with other allied professionals, financing, types of real estate investments, and so on. There's my contact information. It's simply michael@askmichael.ca, and my phone number is there as well. To give you an idea of what we're going to cover tonight, we're going to walk, by the end of the presentation, you'll walk away with some good screening tips, some things to include in your lease terms, and how to deal with late paying tenants. A brief disclaimer to keep my lawyer happy. Basically, all this is saying I'm presenting information and not legal or tax advice. You can just ask your questions by unmuting yourself or raise your hand electronically like Sonia did to start the ball rolling. And my gift to you, if you stick around to the end of the presentation, I have a $100 gift to share with each one of you. So we'll get started with the presentation. In terms of screening tips, you're going to want to start with the standard screening, which involve using a rental application. It's important to use the same one every time to protect yourself from being sued under the Human Rights Act. And I was just looking at something today, which it sounds ridiculous, but you're not allowed to discriminate against a tenant based on their perceived ability to pay, which to me is ridiculous, but that's why I'm not looking to become a huge landlord in Ontario. So what you do is you ask for a whole package of information, part of which will include their income, which seems to me like you're just trying to hide what you're getting at. But you start with an employment letter, and you'll need to obviously verify whatever is in the letter. Certainly they're required to verify the start date for the employee, their position, and of course their salary. Anything else gets a little iffy, but that is certainly fair game. You're going to want to ask for pay stubs if they're an employee. You're going to ask for their rental history so you can contact previous landlords. You also need to get an authorization to run a credit check. You're not actually allowed to run credit checks without the authorization of the prospective tenant. Some people will ask the tenant to get their credit report. That's a little iffy because some people have been known to sort of fake these documents, or they'll get you a legitimate document, but it's one from a bank that doesn't give you all the details. You're going to want to look for something that's going to tell you, have they been bankrupt? Have they made late payments many times? Have they been applying for credit recently in multiple locations? That's a sign that money is very short. And you want to be able to see what their credit card and loan balances are. And all of that will be available in the credit report. It's to their advantage actually to know what's in their credit as well, because they're not always accurate. I don't know if you've pulled your own credit, but the two main companies in Canada are TransUnion and Equifax, and I think their website is simply that.ca, and you can get your own credit report, the full report from them, for free once a year. And so if you've never done that, you absolutely should do that to make sure it's correct. Actually, our co-host George and I both worked for the same person who had a Canadian Tire credit card, which he, quote, never used. And so he got letters monthly from them with statements in them, which he never opened because he knew he never used it. He then went to get a loan, I think it was to buy a car, and they said, well, you've got this unpaid credit card on your credit report. I said, what are you talking about? Turns out that Canadian Tire had accidentally posted someone else's charges to his account. And because he knew he never used the card, he didn't bother to check. As a result, it made getting a loan for that car that much more difficult. So it's always a good idea to check on these things for yourself. You're also going to want to get their ID to make sure they are who they say they are. And you have to do all this before they actually take possession of the place. Sonia was just asking, is the same information provided by both of these two main companies, TransUnion and Equifax? They will be much the same, but they won't be identical. And that's simply because not every supplier of credit, which is the credit card companies, the banks, the lenders, they don't necessarily report to both of these companies. So the odds are very good, though, that you're not going to have one credit report that looks perfectly fine and have another one that's completely the opposite because of this small amount of things that are not in both reports. You can rely on one or the other, is what I'm saying. You don't need both. So this is the standard which most people are used to. I want to point out here, though, the one more form technique. And this is where either you or your property manager, depending on the situation, drops by where the tenant is currently living, and you'll have that information because it's in the application. And you say, oh, I just have one more form for you to sign. And the whole idea there is what you're doing is seeing how they live, because the odds are very, very high that however they're treating their current place is how they'll be treating your place. So if everything is tidy, the lawn is neat, there's not a lot of junk lying around, their home is clean and tidy, that's obviously a good sign, and odds are very good they're going to treat your home in the same way. And obviously the converse is true. If there's junk everywhere, if the place is dirty, then they're going to treat your place the same way. And obviously that's a tenant that you're going to reject. In terms of lease terms, for the most part, every residential tenancy is governed in Ontario by the standard form lease. The form number is 229E. It's dated December 2020. It's a seven-page form. with additional explanation pages. You're required to fill this out completely. You can add additional terms to cover off things that you would like to cover off, but you can't contravene any of the standard lease terms. So you basically can't contract out of anything that the standard lease calls for. So one example is pets. A lot of landlords don't like pets because they tend to be hard on the furniture and so on. But even if you have a no pet clause in your lease, it's actually not enforceable. So if your tenant said, oh no, I don't have any pets, then they move in and they have pets, you can't do anything about it. But this is something that you'll likely be able to find out with that one more form technique, because you'll see if there's a dog or a cat, which typically the pets, lying around, or their bowls or food or water bowls and that sort of thing. So that's something you can tease out from that. What you do want to add though is the quarterly replacement. So, and that's simply you add a clause that you're going to be entering the unit at least every quarter to change smoke alarm batteries, furnace filters, and that sort of thing. And the reason for this is simply, if someone is not intending to keep your property in tip-top condition, they're not going to want you to come in once, let alone 4 times a year, and they're likely to withdraw their application. So it's these little tips that can make a big difference by doing things that are completely legal, but you're basically getting the tenant to reveal their true selves.
Michael, before you continue, I just wanted to let you know there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Thank you. Okay, so question: if we decide to lease a room in a home where I live and share the kitchen with the tenant. Okay. That, I believe, is going to be outside the Residential Tenancy Act, which is the current landlord-tenant legislation. I believe you're technically under the Roomers and Boarders Act at that point, and tenants have far fewer rights. Off the top of my head, I can't say exactly what they have, but I think it's more like a week or something to get out, that sort of thing. It's not nearly the same as a true landlord-tenant situation, which is covered under the Residential Tenancies Act. Sonia, did you want to add something to that?
I did, Michael. I'm really enjoying this discussion, and I did wanted to add something, a little bit of personal experience based off what my friend just recently went through. So obviously, he did not know this rule. He did not, because this boarding or whatnot act is not glorified or specified. So he went in and rented a room in this $1 million house, and something happened between him and his landlord, and pretty much the lady evicted him within 2 days. He had given her, last month's deposit. She actually asked for 60-day deposit. He did not return the money. He had actually also paid for the month when he was evicted. So pretty much she gouged him for 3 months of money. And just because she didn't like the tone of his voice, she evicted him. And he was gone, and he had no rights. So a lot of landlords, I feel, there is a loophole in the system, I guess. And as a landlord, I feel that's a good thing, right? I also have a home. Let's say if I do decide to rent these rooms out, so I just wanted to, again, get an opinion from the expert that what I'm hearing is in fact correct, because pretty much the cops, when they were called, they told him that he didn't know what his rights were, and that's not their problem. Pick up your bags and leave. So that's very interesting concept. I've been renting out homes for a very long time, and I had no idea that as a landlord, I was able to do this, and something like this even existed.
Yeah, the other exception is if you share laundry facilities. Yeah, and a bathroom. That's one of the three things. So basically, what they're trying to differentiate is between a room as opposed to a self-contained unit. In the
Okay.
self-contained unit, you have your own kitchen. Doesn't matter how big it is. You have your own bathroom, and I'm pretty sure laundry facilities is the other one. But certainly kitchen and bathroom for sure. That has been the sort of line of demarcation between landlord tenant and roomers and boarders going back to when I first started working in this area, which was all the way back in the late 80s when I was working
Okay.
in the landlord tenant office at university. So that's been the consistent theme is you can't be held responsible under the Landlord Tenant Act, as it was then called, now the Residential Tenancies Act, if you share a bathroom, if you share a kitchen.
Okay. And that rule is still the same. There haven't been any changes on it or anything like that, to your knowledge.
No, no. No. I'm just doing a quick Google search, and they're saying that if you went to court, it'd be more what's reasonable, but he's already out, right? So
Exactly. Exactly. But that's fine for me now for future investments, right? That kind of makes me a little better because at the moment, just, landlords don't have that many rights when it comes to tenant evictions. You have to wait. You have to take it, through the landlord board and things of that nature, and file claims. And if you have mortgage and condominium fees and the tenant is not paying, you can't just go change the locks and get the tenant out, like you can in Texas.
no,
So
no.
when so it makes more sense to Airbnb and do the room and boarding type of, have that type of arrangement than to rent the whole place to one tenant. For me, anyway.
Yes, well, I was just going to add that this is absolutely geared at a short-term rental situation because you have someone staying for the weekend. You don't want them to all of a sudden be able to claim tenancy rights and being able to stay there indefinitely while you have to take them before the board. And the landlord-tenant board, it's definitely not an equal situation. They're 99.9% in favor of tenants. If the landlord
100%. Yeah.
landlord goes there and you have like one little mistake in your paperwork, they don't say, okay, correct it, initial it, give the other side a copy, we'll keep going. No, they said, you gotta start all over again.
100%. Yeah, they sure do.
And right now it's taking 6 to 8 months just to get a hearing. So that means you have to wait another 6 to 8 months to get back. And even if you get the eviction order, it's not like they're out the next day, right? You have to then engage the sheriff, and the sheriff has very specific rules about how he deals with you. You got to get a specific appointment, and then you make arrangements with the sheriff. The sheriff goes out, and by the way, the sheriff is the only one legally entitled to physically pick up a delinquent tenant and throw them out of your unit. The cops are not allowed to. It's illegal for cops
Oh,
to do
wow.
that.
Okay.
And
Okay. Interesting.
but even the sheriff, he's not going to have them out the next day. He's going to put a notice on their door. And
Wow.
the professional tenants, usually they clear out the day before. He's going to show up and physically toss them out.
Great. I like your tip about, going and checking a potential client's existing residence before them coming on board. That way you can check and see how they're treating the house they're living in. So that's something for me to note 100%. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I like that. And it's, God knows there's a million forms to fill out. You can make that seem quite plausible, but you're going to catch them off guard because for sure they're not expecting that. And some tenants say, oh, I'm basically out the door anyway. I'm not even going to try to keep the place tidy, right? So
Right.
I know I took over just as a tenant from another tenant, and the first 3 days were just spent cleaning. I had to stuff everything in the kitchen so I could clean the rest of the place. It was
I usually
quite dirty.
I usually put in my lease to ensure to clean it professionally clean once they leave it, or else they're not gonna. I always ask for a damage deposit. So I say to them as a leverage that if you want your damage deposit back or whatnot, ensure that it's professionally clean. And I give them an example of what professionally clean is. So they usually do it. I've been lucky with that.
Yeah, I do that as well. I have one tenant, and I've had, let's see, 3 good tenants. The first 2 were good tenants. I thought, oh, this landlord-tenant stuff is easy. Then I had the infamous bad tenant, such that I spent many months trying to get rid of a cockroach problem, and eventually got them to move out. I was too stubborn / foolish to pay them to leave, because that really was going to hurt me. To
Yeah.
What they call it, cash for keys.
Exactly. That's a new term now in the real estate industry. It's like cash for keys. There you go. Yes.
On principle. So why am I rewarding you for bad behavior? It just burned me. So I will say, to their credit, they didn't stiff me on any rent, but I had to pay for many cockroach treatments. And then, well, actually, George helped me a lot with the renos after they left. We put in about, I think it was about somewhere around $15,000 to $17,000 of renos, and it paid off, because I was able to increase the rent by 25%. But
that's great.
At that point, I was wondering, did I ever want to have a tenant again? So
I completely understand that. Another question I have quickly is if you want to shed the light on. Now they incorporated this in the last few years or so, is that if we ask a tenant, let's say if we give a tenant and what is it, and 12 that I'm moving in or something or the other.
Yeah.
We have to pay them.
You have to pay them now.
1 month's rent.
Yeah.
1 month's rent.
That's
now,
right.
A lot of tenants are not. They don't even read the RTA. You know, they just sign and go in. If they are not in the know, do we have to bring it to their attention and say, hey, I'm moving in and here's the money, or do I wait for them to kind of ask me for it, or am I legally obligated to pay them?
You're legally obligated
to. How closely do they follow up?
You're legally obligated to pay them. You can wait for them to bring it to your attention, but they can bring it to your attention months after the fact. So.
What if the N9's already been signed, or N11 has been signed, or whatever?
Yeah, I don't think that matters.
Okay.
I will point out that the only deposits you're legally allowed to ask for is 1 month's rent, as a last month rent type thing. You're not allowed to do any other deposit with the exception of a key deposit, which has to be based on the actual cost of the keys. So I have my rental unit in a condo, so there's a fob to go through the doors, and it's one of these security keys, so you can't just go to Walmart and copy it for $3.99.
It has to be made from a company. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so those keys are not cheap. So I think, and they wanted multiple sets, so it was over $60 or $65 a set, and they had 3 sets. So I charged a $200 key deposit for 3 sets, which is, I think the math is $195, so it's basically the same. You're not allowed, unfortunately, to ask for any damage deposits, which, like many of these things, the honest people like you and I get punished because there was some abuse in the past. But yeah, it's.
Now, what if you only ask for the key deposit, but you go do your inspection, which you're supposed to do 30 days prior to them moving out or whatnot, and that's what they say. It's better to do it closer to the time they're moving out. And let's say the day you're supposed to meet your tenant to exchange keys or whatnot, and there's a big hole in the wall, right? So are you able to keep that key deposit to take care of that damage, or you're obligated to return that key deposit?
No, you're obligated to return it if they return the keys. The only way you keep the money is if they keep the keys. And then, unfortunately, you have to sue them in small claims court for the damages.
Okay, good to know.
And good luck. Uh,
Exactly. Who
e-
has time and
who
patience?
has time? And again, it's going to take you months to get in, and you have
Right.
your pictures, proof, great, and the judge says, "I agree with you." The person, they probably won't even show up, frankly, because what's their defense? The wall
Right.
started it. I mean, that's not really good.
Exactly.
It's not really going to work. And so they'll say, okay, here, judgment for the plaintiff, and they hand you a piece of paper saying you have judgment. And you say, now what? It's up to you.
Now,
We got nothing to do with it. So they don't actually help you enforce the judgment. They just hand it to you.
so is the government doing anything further? You guys are the experts in the field and you have a lot of knowledge than, the regular bodies or whatever. Is the government doing anything more to protect the rights of the landlords? Because all we hear now in these days are poor tenants, poor tenants, poor tenants, yet they keep on increasing our taxes, this and that. We have to worry about the maintenance fees of the buildings, HOAs, things of that nature. Is the government putting anything in place to watch our behinds, the landlords? Are you hearing anything?
Short answer is no. And I think, unfortunately, the electoral calculus is against us. Basically, there's more tenants than landlords. Simple as that.
Yeah.
So I think it's not the best way to do it. If they actually want homes to be built, if they actually want homes to be rented, then you've got to encourage landlords, you've got to encourage builders. As George mentioned, I'm CFO and CTO for a home builder, and we actually looked at building rental units as opposed to just selling them outright. And the math just doesn't work, because you can sell a home for a lot more than the rent you could get for that unit would get you. It's just, with these prices, that you can't carry the mortgage at that point.
Right.
With the tenant's rents are proportionally quite low in comparison to the carrying costs. And if you're buying a new condo, I don't know. I've never seen the numbers work, frankly, with a condo that you're buying currently, putting down a 20% down payment. You can't charge enough rent.
Right. Can you shed the light on the year that it's built? Because I know there's some sort of notion that if the property is built on a certain year, you cannot jack up the rent and you have to stick to the province standard. I think right now it's 2.5%. But if your building falls under the criteria or was built some other year, can you shed a light on that?
Yeah, it does depend on when your condo or your home was built, whether it's subject to rent control. You're correct. The current guideline amount is 2.5%, and basically, if you don't have any extraordinary expenses, like you had to put in a new roof, something dramatic like that, you're not going to be allowed to charge any more than that.
What
And
if I put in brand new appliances, change all five of the appliances in the condo?
no,
No?
that's not going to
Okay.
be enough. That I put in basically 3 new appliances when I rent did that changeover. But the reason I was able to increase the rent is because between tenants, right, you can go up to market rate. So you can always do that. It's when the tenant remains, you're stuck with this guideline amount.
Oh, okay.
So my condo was built in 1991, but it missed the rent control cutoff by less than a year. And so if it had been built, I think 6 or months later or whatever, it would have been exempt. But then under Kathleen Wynne, they extended the rent control guidelines to cover more buildings. And I don't know off the top of my head where the exact deadline is, but yes, it absolutely depends on when it was built.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Here's Sean then for that. So, to my understanding, it's that anything new construction that's built after 2018 November, then there's no rent control for that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
No worries.
So dealing with late paying tenants, the basic approach that I suggest is you treat this as a business, right? That's not a charity. You're not here to hear a sob story. So if they're a day late with the rent, they get served with the N4 form, which is a notice to end a tenancy early for non-payment of rent. You can't let people drag that out, because if you do, the problem's just going to get worse. You let go a day, then the next time it's 2 days, then the next time it's 3 days, then the next time it's a week. Unfortunately, this is an area where if you give people an inch, they'll take a mile. I had a tenant that asked me to hold a check, and I said, okay, I'll do this once and for a day. And I told her that the next time I'm going to put it through, even though you told me it's going to bounce, and you're going to pay me the fees for doing that, because you just can't let people get into a habit of paying you late. That sets up a very bad precedent. Again, going back to my home builder hat, we do have a few rental properties, and we have a tenant who's now 5 figures behind in rent, and she's not even keeping current, let alone digging into the backlog. And she keeps coming up with these plans to pay us back and then not living up to them, and we still can't get her out. Basically, we have to get her to agree to something, have her not do it, and then we have to take that to the landlord-tenant board and then get an eviction order. But it got so bad in the first place. I'm not very happy about that, because it all happened before I was looking at that, and it's not a good thing for sure. It just, you train people to have bad habits essentially. Entry for repairs, as you're probably aware, you have to give 24-hour written notice before you can enter. And if you give that notice, technically it doesn't matter if the tenant wants you in or not, if it's inconvenient or what have you. They can't deny you entry legally. But in the spirit of keeping as good a relationship as possible, if it's not an emergency, in which case you can go in at any time, I think it's always best to get the tenant's permission to come in, even though technically you don't need it. But when you are given the notice, you have to give the reason for entry, the date you'll enter, and the time of entry, which is going to be between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And again, because the landlord-tenant board, it might as well just drop the L and just be called the tenant board. They've actually given damages to a tenant because the landlord specified too long a time frame to come in, and I think they were actually changing smoke alarm batteries in that case, and they specified something like a 9-hour time frame, and the board said it's unreasonable. It should have been a much tighter time frame. So if you don't supply that notice, the 24-hour notice setting out those 3 points, reason for entry, the date, and the time, the tenant can legally deny entry. But they can't deny entry simply because the time's not convenient, and they're not allowed to interfere with the landlord or the landlord's agent. So perhaps you've arranged with the trade to come in and do some electrical or plumbing work, which I usually go and let them in, and I just leave because they don't want me there and I've got things to do. So that's fine. And they're also required to take whatever steps are necessary to make the unit safe for entry, which is, clearing away any obstacles to where the repairs are going to be taking place, and they have to restrain any pets, because obviously you don't want someone to get attacked by a dog or what have you while they're trying to fix your place. When it comes to a lease expiring, the question is, do you actually need to sign a renewal? You don't need to sign a renewal, and typically it's recommended not to. When you're renting it out initially, you usually do have to sign a lease, and if this is a new property, in order to apply for the residential rental rebate for the provincial portion of HST, which is a maximum of $24,000, you actually have to present a lease for at least a year in order to get your money back. But beyond that, it's hard to argue that there's much of an upside. If you ever have a problem with that tenant, typically you can't evict them till the end of the lease. And if they're on month to month, which is the default situation if no new tenancy agreement is signed, then it's a 60-day time frame for them to get evicted. Whereas if you signed a year-long lease and there's problems after 3 months, now you got to wait 9 months to evict them. Not really much of an upside, because they can stay as long as they want, barring, as you talked about earlier, Sonia, where you serve a form saying you're going to occupy the unit yourself or a member of your immediate family, in which case you have to bribe them with that 1 month of rent payment to get them out. So yeah, I don't recommend typically that you sign a second lease with the same party. There's not really a lot of upside. Oh, how did that get in there? That was just supposed to be for warm-up purposes only. So in summary, basically with a few simple changes, you can make being a landlord much easier while attracting a higher quality of tenant. And ultimately that's what you want. You've made an investment in a property, you want it to pay dividends, so to speak, and you want to have good tenants. That's the starting point for it. Our next event will be the last Thursday in September, September 28th. Again, we start at 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll announce the topic at a later date. So now's the time for any additional questions.
I have a quick question. So let's say, okay, so my question is, does the landlord-tenant board, do they only recognize a 1-year lease, or a lease is recognizable? Let's say if my present tenant, who I had in the property for 1 year, and I didn't know that it's good to just let it go month to month, and the tenant says that, hey, Sonia, I can only stay for 7 months. I'm buying my own condo. Can you please do a lease with me for 7 months?
Sure.
Because I live in a condominium where they don't recognize a short-term lease, nor Airbnb is allowed in my condo building where I own the condo. So my lease has to be over 6 months. So I go ahead and sign a 7-month lease with this tenant. Does the same rules apply, and is it recognizable?
Yeah, that's fine. Short-term stay is defined as 30 days or less. So as long as you're over 30 days, then that takes you outside the short-term rental situation. And where that is relevant actually is when it comes to HST. If it's a long-term rental situation, and anything over a month would qualify, so 6-7 months definitely does, there's no HST chargeable. If, however, it's a short-term rental situation, as soon as you have earned more than $30,000, then you actually have to register for HST and start charging it. And that also supposes that you have no other businesses in your name, because the 30,000 number is for all your lines of business. So if you have some other side gig, that actually counts towards that 30,000.
Okay, good to know.
All right. Any other questions?
So how do we sign up for that $100 gift card?
Well, it's not a gift card, but that is, I think, my last slide. If you go to Book with Michael, you can, which I will put in the chat.
I already dropped it in.
Okay, thanks. Then you can see this screen. Which allows you to book a 15-minute consultation, a $100 value.
Amazing. That's amazing. Great.
So if you've never used Calendly before, it's quite straightforward. You just click on the days. So we've got times available on Friday and Monday. And you just click on anywhere from 2 to 5:45. I'll just click on this, click next. You fill in your name, your email, cell phone number, and any other details. You hit schedule. I'm not going to click on that because then that locks you out of that time slot, and I'd just be meeting with myself anyway, so that doesn't really accomplish anything. But yeah.
Right. And let's say if in the future, let's say, if I love the consultation and everything, and I want to, in the future, I say, hey, Michael, I'm switching everything over to you. I want you to be my new account and whatnot. Do you do all your interactions with clients online, or do you do in-person meetings when it comes closer to tax time?
I do both. Obviously, for obvious reasons, most of my contacts have been virtual the last couple of years. I think I met about 5 clients in person over 2 years. I'm located in the Markham area, Highway 7 in Bayview, but I have clients I've never met, clients I'll never meet because they're just too far away. And we can do so much now with Zoom and these various, DocuSign and other signing tools, and that it's not required. I just send things up by email. People print them out, sign them, scan the back, and I file them and send out PDFs of their various filings. So I definitely prefer to meet people in person, but it's just not always possible, just because of geography and other things.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so Ricky, did you have any other questions?
No, I guess we're good. So
Okay. Well, I just will give you a few minutes to book in a slot, and be happy to chat with you on whatever issue is particular to your situation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, George and Michael, for organizing that. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, thanks for your participation, and
Thank you.
hope to chat with you soon.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay, take care. So it seems like, I think we've got everything in the chat, George, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next meeting on September 28th. Until then, you have my booking, and if you have any questions, again, my email is michael@askmichael.ca, and be happy to go over any of issues that you might have. So once again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.
okay, thanks, George. Thanks.
Bye now.
Bye.